Pursuant to Chapter 4, Section 85 of the New York City Charter, a meeting of Bronx Borough Board will take place this morning, Monday, January 29th, starting at 10:04. And it will be held in person at 851 Grand Concourse, room 915. As always, we have a robust agenda for you this morning. I'll use my outside voice. We hope everyone is doing well. We'll start with roll call, starting off with our community board members. Community Board 1.
Anthony George, District Manager, Chair of the Board.
Good morning. Community Board 2.
Good morning, Ralph Acevedo, District Manager. I'm the Secretary of the
Thank you. Community Board 3.
Joanna Brown, Vice Chair, Community Board 3.
Good morning. Community Board 4.
Robert Galvez, Chair.
Community Board 5.
Angel Caballero, Chair.
Community Board 6.
Yvonne Papers, Chair.
Good morning. Community Board 7.
Barbara Stronzo, First Vice Chair.
Community Board 8.
Julie Reyes, Chairperson.
Community Board 9. Community Board 10.
Present.
Community Board 11. Community Board 12.
Beatrice Parnell, Chair. Good morning.
Buenos dias, good morning. Moving on to City Council Representatives, District 8, Councilmember Diana Ayala.
Stephanie Herrera, from the Deputy Governor's Office.
District 11, Councilmember Eric Dinowitz.
Stephanie Rodriguez on behalf of Denowitz's office.
District 12, Councilmember Kevin Riley.
Good morning, everyone. Simone Jones, Chief of Staff on behalf of Councilmember Riley.
Good morning. District 13, Councilmember Christy Mamorato. District 14, Councilmember Birina Sanchez.
Samantha Cardenas, Chief of Staff to Councilmember Birina Sanchez.
Right on time. District 15, Councilmember Oswald Feliz. District 16, Councilmember Althea Stevens.
District 16, Councilmember Althea Stevens, Tariq Israel, Deputy Chief.
District 17, Councilmember Rafael Salamanca. District 18, Councilmember Amanda Farias.
Rebecca Nieves, Deputy Chief of Staff on behalf of Councilmember Farias. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I just want to quickly update folks on the changes to Borough Board and Service Cabinet meetings. After much thought and consideration, the Bronx Borough President's Office has decided to move forward with hosting separate meetings of the Borough Service Cabinet, the BSC, and Borough Board, the BB. This will allow for a more in-depth conversation as the topics will be tailored to specific roles of each entity. We know that Borough Board will address land use and policy issues, while Borough Service Cabinet will seek to ensure equitable service delivery throughout the borough. And the members of the Borough Service Cabinet include the 12 district managers in addition to representatives of our city agencies. I just want to remind everyone that we surveyed both entities and have shared a schedule with tentative dates based on the responses that we received. If you have any concerns, please do not hesitate to share them with us via email, and we will try to address them accordingly. But thank you everyone for adjusting and accommodating to the changes. We hope that in the next Borough Board, we won't be as tight as we are in this room. We are going through some internal operational changes, and hopefully we can have a better setup. But thank you all for being here this morning and accommodating to the change. I just want to transition into our first agenda item. The first agency to present is the Department of City Planning, who will present on the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity Text Amendment, which encompasses the mission of 4 primary goals. Goal number 1 is to make it easier for businesses to find a space and grow by giving business owners more certainty on where they can locate and where they can relocate their business spaces. Goal number 2 is support growing industries by reducing obstacles for emerging business types. Goal 3 is to foster vibrant neighborhoods by ensuring businesses contribute to active, safe, and walkable streets. And goal 4 is to create new opportunities for local businesses to open by establishing new zoning tools to boost job growth and business expansion. Many of the representatives here today have viewed this presentation and provided recommendations and feedback at your respective community boards. Additionally, our office has shared with you all the Borough President's submission to the City Planning Commission on this specific text amendment, which includes the Borough President's recommendations and modifications. Today, we will have the Department of City Planning provide an overview and answer any questions before we move forward on a motion to vote on this text amendment. So please welcome Matt Wiskovic, Senior Planner for Economic Development and Regional Planning. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Waskevitz. I'm a senior planner here in the Department of City Planning, project manager for this text amendment. I'm joined by Paul Phillips, director of the DCP Bronx office. Yeah, no problem. Bear with us a moment as we get the presentation up. Yeah, it's not loading.
Is this the city of Yes?
Yes.
If you have it on that laptop, please, you can connect that. I'm not sure what goes up and on.
What is the connection?
HDMI?
HDMI? I can make that work. Hold on. Thank you. All right, I'll try that a second time. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. That is a resounding good morning for a Monday morning. I'm going to keep my caffeine close, and I'll also keep the presentation short, since I know that many folks have seen a version of this presentation. Before I begin, I just want to thank all of you, especially members of the community board, for your consideration and time on these proposals over the last few months. We know there's a lot of details in here, and it's a complex proposal, so on behalf of the department, just wanted to thank you for your time, your consideration, many great questions we've received, as well as detailed feedback we've received already into our land use portal. So I have about 15 minutes worth of presentation, and then I'll leave plenty of time for questions. City of Yes for Economic Opportunity is the second of 3 separate proposals under the City of Yes umbrella focused on updating and modernizing our city zoning resolution. The first is City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality, was adopted by the City Council last December and was focused and is now part of the zoning resolution, ways to green our buildings, our streets, and our city. City of Yes for Economic Opportunity is what we're talking about this morning. And then to come is City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, which is meant to be an inclusive citywide approach to our city's affordable housing crisis, so that we expect to enter public review later this spring. Well, when it comes to small businesses and our zoning, a lot of the work here really started coming out of the pandemic, looking at the ways in which businesses had to adapt overnight to changing economic conditions, in many ways exposed the realities of an outdated zoning that for much of small business has not been updated since the early 1960s. So it includes plenty of outdated terms and business restrictions, things like you can clearly define where a typewriter repair shop is allowed to locate, but if you do cell phone repair, you can look through thousands of pages in the zoning and not find that information. And all of this costs small businesses time and money. And so what we want to do is to simplify and modernize the way that our zoning thinks about small business regulations, really make sure that our zoning is more adaptable and that it reflects today's economy. 4 goals for this work. The first, we want to make it easier for small businesses to find space and grow. So these are all the ways in which our zoning has had barriers that are holding back the ability to locate, to operate, and to grow a small business here in the city. Goal number 2 is about boosting growing industries. So these are emerging business types, businesses that weren't really around or weren't as prominent in the early 60s when the zoning was last updated for many of these business types. And so we want to reduce obstacles, or in many cases, just make the zoning much more clear, where today it's ambiguous in some situations. Goal number 3 is about enabling more business-friendly streetscapes. We know that business activity isn't just what happens within a space, within a storefront, but how that business interacts with its surroundings. Goal number 4, we want to create new opportunities for businesses to open. So this is updating our zoning toolkit for the future so that we can have different ways for businesses to adapt over time. Within those 4 goals, there are 18 separate components. I'm going to walk through them only at the highest level, but if you have any questions, there's some more detail behind each of them, so I can go into more detail. And also, everything that I'm saying here in much more detail you can find at nyc.gov/yes, economic opportunity. We have a whole host of resources on our website to help you in understanding what's under the hood with some of these. But goal number 1, these are 6 components or proposals to reform our zoning that focus on the ability to make it easier for businesses, particularly our city's small businesses, to find space and grow. Goal number 1 is about vacant storefronts that are considered non-conforming. So these are stores that are located in residential areas. In many cases, they've been around for decades, but in some residential areas, there is a provision in our zoning that says if you've been vacant for more than 2 years, you can't reoccupy that storefront space with a new business. So it has to remain vacant. We think this is a clear contributor to storefront vacancy in our city, and so in those instances, we want to remove that 2-year time clock. Goal number 2, we have many kinds of similar but distinct zoning designations. For example, in neighborhood commercial corridors, you have typical C1 or C2 zoning, and in many places across the Bronx and across the rest of our city, you have these districts that are located along the same corridor or even on opposite sides of the street from one another, and yet the businesses that they allow are different. So we want to simplify things and treat similar zoning districts in a similar way, allow the same kinds of mix of businesses across C1 and C2 districts, and then the same mix of businesses across our city's office and more higher density commercial areas, those being our C4, C5, and C6 district. Goal number 3 is about small scale production. The way that our zoning thinks about making things really comes out of the idea of mass production in the middle of the 20th century. So it thinks that most production is going to be built in factories, and notably, our zoning predates most modern environmental regulation. And so it didn't reflect changes in technology, changes in business practices that allow for many kinds of businesses to be able to make things and sell them in the same space. Things like coffee roasters, microbreweries, jewelry makers, 3D printers, and the like. And so we want to enable for maker businesses at a small scale to locate in commercial corridors, provided that they meet environmental standards to ensure that they are appropriate to locate near neighbors. Proposal number 4 is about loading. And if you're one of the maker businesses I just mentioned and you want to locate in an empty office building above the ground floor, oftentimes you have additional loading requirements that you have to have, because again, the way that zoning thinks about these businesses, factory setting from the mid-20th century. So what we're proposing here in number 4 is to waive the additional loading that you might have for one of these kinds of production businesses when they're locating in an office space that's empty. Proposal number 5. Many buildings today, you can have a mix of residential and commercial uses or activities. And our zoning typically says you have commercial uses on the ground floor, the first couple of floors, and then residential above. But there are some instances where we think it makes sense to allow for a mix of uses throughout the building. The first of these is in our typical neighborhood commercial corridor. You can have a second floor doctor's office, but if that doctor's office goes away, in many places there's no way in our zoning to occupy that same second floor with another kind of office. So in these instances, we want to allow for a mix of commercial on the second floor. But in our higher density areas, where we have empty office buildings, for example, oftentimes the zoning makes you clear out the entire building, even to convert part of it to residential. What we want to do here is enable a mix of commercial uses above the second floor in places that are higher density, our C4, C5, and C6 districts. We think this is perfect and great for helping to enable partial office to residential conversion, and generally just allow for a mix of uses on upper floors. We're doing a number of things here to make it sure that there are safeguards for residents, namely you have complete separation between commercial and residential parts of a building, and depending on the kind of use that's looking to locate, you have to have additional sound attenuation standards to make sure that you're not going to create a nuisance for the neighbors. Number 6 is about the terms we use in our zoning to classify businesses. So I mentioned earlier typewriter repair. That's just one of many kinds of outdated terms we have in our zoning for classifying businesses, but if you weren't around 60 years ago, your kind of business isn't reflected. And the way that this costs businesses time and money, typically you might have to go to the Department of Buildings, spend 6 months or more in a process just to clarify that you in fact can locate in a space. So what we're doing here is just updating the terminology we use to classify our businesses, make sure it reflects today's economy, and make it a lot more clear on where you can go and what you can do. Goal number 2 is all about boosting emerging industries. These are not the only emerging business types across our city, but they are ones where we've identified a zoning barrier that we want to address, or just some ambiguity or confusion that we want to alleviate. Proposal 7 is on urban agriculture. Now you can have vertical farming such as hydroponics today along a commercial street so long as it's in a greenhouse, but you can't do the same thing right below that greenhouse in a building or on another part of the lot. So what we're saying here is that if you can do it in a greenhouse, you can have it inside a building as well. Proposal 8 is around laboratories. Most commercial areas today allow a laboratory, but the kind of terminology it uses is very outdated. It says that you can manufacture dentures, but it's not clear what else, and that you have to be focused on medical or dental, and yet a lot of the research going on for tomorrow's therapeutics, vaccines, medical devices, New York City can be a hub for life sciences. We see this here in the Bronx as well, and that potential exists. But we want to make sure that the zoning is clear on where laboratories can locate so that more of this research can be going on, and especially updating a special permit that today could allow for more research to happen closer to where hospitals and universities are, because we know that this is an industry that likes to cluster near research. Proposal 9 is on nightlife. Any bar or restaurant in the city today, if you're at a small scale, you can have live music. So you can have a concert, you can have people visit you. But the zoning says that oftentimes where you can have live music, you can't dance to that music. You also can't have comedy or open mic nights in that same space oftentimes. So what we're doing here is addressing the last parts of our cabaret laws that have held back the ability for people to dance in small bars and venues, keeping the size of these businesses small so that you can have, in places where live music is allowed today, people can dance to that music. Proposal 10 is around experiential businesses or amusements. So there are all kinds of experiential business types, things like laser tag, or wanting to have some sort of a escape room, or even something like an indoor skydiving. You see this just across the border into Westchester County. Yet many of these business types can't locate in the Bronx because of our confusing zoning that says if you're experiential, you're really appropriate only for Coney Island or the city's industrial districts. So this is old zoning that we want to update and make it more clear that a wide range of experiential type businesses are allowed. Small scale if you're in a neighborhood commercial district, a larger scale if you're in an office district. Lastly, under our second goal are home occupations. Zoning allows for a wide range of home business types. So you could be a jewelry maker, you could be a lawyer, you could be a music teacher, and you can have people visit you in your home. But you can't be a barber, you can't be an interior decorator. And we know that despite the fact that many folks were doing this kind of work in their homes during the pandemic, the zoning hasn't kept up to reflect how people work from home today. So what we're proposing here is to allow for types of businesses that are explicitly prohibited today, like barbers and interior designers. But we're also adding in some flexibility around the size of your business. So today you can have 25% of your home devoted to home business activities. We want to expand that so that you can have the flexibility to do more work in your home, provided you're a home first. You still have to be a home first. And just trying to make sure that the regulations are much more clear on what you can do, while keeping in place an awful lot of safeguards we have in the zoning to make sure that if you are creating a nuisance, that's able to be addressed. Goal number 3, we want to enable more business-friendly streetscapes. These are things that we're doing in the zoning to address potential for conflict between a particular business and the street around it, the sidewalk around it. So proposal 12 is about our streetscape or urban design regulations. And oftentimes you see inconsistent or perhaps even non-existent rules around commercial ground floor design. So you might see, for example, a long brick blank wall that's just very uninviting and can really disrupt the character of an entire main street. Or other times you might see a new construction building and they have to put the parking somewhere, so they put the parking in the front rather than the side or the rear, and this creates a strip mall type feel along what otherwise would be a main street corridor. So what we're doing here is we're introducing some ground floor design rules that can be more consistent and easy to understand, but more importantly, make sure that the kinds of new buildings that we see are going to be ones that are contributing to that main street-like feel. Proposal 13 is around auto repair businesses. Now, many of these businesses are industrial in nature. Much of this activity occurs in industrial areas, and we think that makes sense for industrial areas. But there are some kinds of auto repair that are allowed to locate along a neighborhood commercial street as well. And in some instances, this business activity, it spills out into the sidewalk, it spills out into the street itself, and can lead to conflicts with other vehicles, with pedestrians, people who are trying to pass by. So what we're doing here is saying that if you're going to locate in a commercial area and you're doing auto repair, that you have to go through some sort of site plan review, make sure that the business activity is going to be contained within the lot and not spilling out into the sidewalk or the street. Proposal 14 is around micro-distribution facilities. So if you are the federal government, you can locate in zoning a post office anywhere. These are neighborhood-based hubs for parcel pickup and delivery, and they help to enable that kind of neighborhood-based distribution of goods that we receive. But if you're not the federal government, you can't do the same thing in a storefront space. And this allows, or what this results in, is an awful lot of what you see in the photo here, where you have vehicles that park on the sidewalk or the street. You have lots of truck trips that go in between a large distribution facility and someone's home, because the zoning doesn't allow for that same type of space like you would have in a post office. So that's what we're enabling here, and working a lot with the Department of Transportation to make sure that we get this one right. I'll round out with goal number 4. So these are new opportunities for local businesses to open. So these are ways in which we want to update our zoning toolkit. So these are all the different public review processes that we have in our zoning that allow a waiver or an update of the zoning for a particular area. So I want to emphasize with all 4 of these, they all go before the community board, and they all go through a public process to make sure that what is being proposed has that process. These are not as of right proposals. So number 15 is around campus commercial space. We know that many large-scale residential campuses, such as NYCHA, are zoned as residential, and this means that oftentimes you can't locate any kind of small-scale makerspace or entrepreneur space or something like that, as well as other retail and services. So what this proposal does is it creates that zoning tool where someone could, in the future, create some sort of space that could be used for that purpose. That could be what we hear from NYCHA as an underutilized office space or storage space located on the ground floor. But this also applies to other large-scale residential campuses as well. 16 is around the idea of having small-scale commercial space in a place that's not zoned for it today. So zoning has no process to allow for a small amount of commercial space to locate on the corner of an intersection. That could be a coffee shop, that could be a small grocery, that could be something that really there is no way to do that in our zoning today, and this allows for a process to do so, goes through environmental review, goes before the community board, and ultimately provides a tool or a pathway, particularly for existing businesses that want to adapt over time. Proposal 17 is around the kinds of waivers or adaptation that we allow in our zoning. So for example, if you are a film studio, oftentimes the shape or the height of the building is what zoning limits you. You're allowed to locate in a space already. The zoning can give you a size of the building you want, but not the shape of the building you want. So this allows for a waiver on a case-by-case basis to look at that kind of a zoning barrier. Lastly, number 18. So sometimes it's the zoning districts themselves and not ways to modify them that are out of date. This is particularly true with our city's manufacturing or M district designations. And so what we're doing here is creating a suite of new kinds of zoning tools that all would require full ULURP, so they would all need to be used in a future rezoning, but it creates a new set of tools for the future if we were to be able to rezone or to have a private application to rezone some areas. So these are all kinds of new M district zoning tools that reflect the historic loft-like buildings we saw in the city historically. Lastly, I'll close with some of the resources that I mentioned we have on our website, nyc.gov/yes economic opportunity. We've been taking a look at each of the 59 community boards in our city and what storefront vacancy looks like in each of those districts, as well as the jobs picture, so that's on our website. We also have a much more detailed description of each of the 18 proposals I walked through, and a project description that goes into even more detail if you're interested in that next level, to help you in bridging the gap between the actual zoning text and each of the 18 components I mentioned. We have something here where it refers to the exact zoning resolution section for each of the 18 components. We have the zoning text itself where we've gone through and we've created comments or annotations behind the changes that we're proposing, or in some cases, we're just moving things around, and so we note that as well. And then lastly, I mentioned the outdated use terms on proposal number 6. We've translated each and every, there are hundreds of uses in our zoning today. We've translated each of them to how they're being proposed in the future, and we've translated them back to the present. So it gives you a nice resource there for helping to understand what we're doing. So with that, I'll turn things back over to questions. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I want to pass it over to the board for any questions or comments.
Hi, just, okay, thank you. Delorny Namoran, CB1.
I am not the chair, but I chair the Committee on Bylaws, Legislation, and Policy. So, are we going to vote on these as one bill, like one policy, or are we going to vote on it on the 18 proposals?
Amendment.
The entire text amendment, okay. So my question's to you, Matt, and I did go on the website and watch some of your videos. Okay, so I want to talk about topic 15, 16, 17, and 18, the efficiency stuff. So in 15 in particular, you're trying to forego the uniform land use review procedure, is my understanding. So usually things come to the community board, and then the borough president, and then city council, and then for approval. Is that only for, is that for all of them or just 15? Okay, sorry.
Now, thanks for the question. So 15 is, actually, I can go to a different slide just to make it a little bit easier here. So 15 refers to campus commercial, 16 refers to corner stores. The zoning tool we proposed here is called a City Planning Commission authorization. So they start a environmental review. After that point, it is referred, is the technical term, out to the community board for 30 days. So the community board still has an opportunity, like they would with any other proposal, to take a look at it. But unlike a full rezoning or ULURP, this process would then stop at the City Planning Commission. So it's section 75-11 for corner stores, and then 75-12 for campus commercial. It specifies the exact findings, or what the City Planning Commission has to make sure that they meet in order to grant the application. So it's a little bit different, but it still goes before the community board. And then on proposal 17, there's actually a few different things going on here. So in some instances, we are creating more uniform access to special permits from the Board of Standards and Appeals. So today, some business types have an access to a BSA permit, some do not. So we're making that much more uniform. But we're also creating, and those all go before the community board as well. We're also creating waivers that go before the City Planning Commission special permit for a larger change, for example. So those go through the full process, including the City Council. And then what I mentioned around film studios is a City Planning Commission authorization. So same process as these two, gets referred to the community board, but then stops at the City Planning Commission. So a couple of different tools going on there within the zoning toolkit. And the number 18, notably, these are full zoning districts, so the full ULURP on through to the City Council.
Okay. Anyone else has one question?
And I just want to remind that we share the recommendations and feedback from the Bronx Borough President's Office with everyone. And I believe this section has comments as well. Any other questions or comments?
Sorry. Okay. Sorry to be a nerd. Okay. So I'm in reference to number 2, topic, let's just start with topic 8, the zoning about life sciences. My biggest concern around the life sciences, which are laboratories, is that Department of Health has the high contaminant research laboratory registration, which is like the list of laboratories that they're very, very concerned about, contaminating high dense locations. So in your life cycle, would those type of laboratories be allowed to be in commercial districts?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So on laboratories, your typical commercial laboratory is known typically as what's called a biosafety level 1. So it's the least standard, if you will, for biosafety. Then goes biosafety level 2, then 3, then 4. And our understanding, in speaking with the Department of Health, is that really the 3 and 4 level are not your typical commercial laboratory. These are the places where you're doing very, very important research. And so there really is little, what's the best way to say this? The way the land use thinks about laboratories and the way that the Department of Health thinks about laboratories, they're a little bit different because they focus on different sets of regulations. So for land use, we just want to make sure that where a laboratory is allowed to go, that it's meeting what the health code says, that it's meeting what the building code says, that's meeting what the fire code says. And then as it relates to laboratories in New York City, they're actually inspected by the state. So before a laboratory can open up, the state has to go through and they have to make sure that they're doing everything they can. So it's our understanding that when a laboratory locates in the city, it's doing everything it needs to, regardless of its biosafety level, to meet city, state, and federal rules. And so these laboratories, they're already allowed in almost every commercial district today. The only changes that we're making are making clear that if you don't have that potential for environmental hazard, you're allowed to locate an office space. This is what the city's interpretation is around laboratories and has been, and we're just making sure that that zoning is much more clear on what you can do. I recognize it's not a straightforward answer, but the way that I'm trying to describe it is land use thinks about laboratories in one way and make sure that all of the city, state, and federal safety codes are met in allowing that lab to open up. And then the way that the Department of Health tracks these facilities is a separate kind of regulatory thing.
I
And-
let someone go.
No, you could continue. if
Oh,
you-
okay, so, all right. Okay, so, in regards to topic 3 and 14, so 3 is allowing manufacturers to locate in commercial zone, and topic 14 is explicit permit of micro distribution facilities. I'm just gonna address them together. So, both of these, factories and the micro distribution facilities may not have front facing. So when you said the federal government has a micro distribution, you're talking about the post office, which we all use to drop off packages and send packages. So there is a retail component to that. And if other factories, what you guys are now going to be labeling productions, may not have a retail component to it. And I think that's really important because we are a walking city, you know? So everything on our block is food or restaurants or stores or grocery store, something that we can use in everyday life. So if a factory or micro distribution doesn't have a retail component or something we can consume, then it really changes the vibrancy of some of these commercial residential districts. So I don't know if you guys thought about that. And another thing on that point is landlords for commercial space is obviously going to pick the highest bidder. And if you include factories and micro distributions as potential bidders, then our small businesses are going to be outbidded. You know what I mean? Because now the landlord can pick from 3 different sectors of the economy. And that is something I don't know if you guys thought of. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Completely understand your concern, and what we're thinking about with these kinds of businesses are they are going to be ones that have a walk-in component. Because when you think about, you mentioned retail rent, storefront rents, the rent of a just production space is by and large much lower than the rent of a storefront or retail space. And so if you're going to be a business that's seeking to locate in a storefront space, looking across the city, also looking to other cities across the country that have made similar kinds of zoning changes, what you see is the kinds of businesses locating in storefront space are ones that have walk-in components. There are jewelry makers who are doing jewelry making in the back and selling in the front. There are a microbrewery who's doing some production in the back and selling in the front. When it relates to micro-distribution type facilities, it's the same sort of principle. So think, for example, a UPS store. UPS store is allowed today in part because they're considered in zoning to be a print shop. So you walk in, you might be able to do printing services, but most of what they're doing today is the kind of package drop-off. Notably, they're not doing a lot of package pickup, and that's in part because they don't have the space to do that kind of activity. So what we're looking at with Proposal 3 on small-scale production and Proposal 14 on microdistribution is the same sort of thing, where the kinds of businesses that are likely to locate in storefront space are a little bit different than the kind of business that's likely to locate in office space. I agree with you that if a 3D printer is going to locate an office space, they're likely not going to have a retail component. Arguably, they don't need to. So we're trying to think about these in a different way based on what we see as being the business form and operation in these kinds of locations. But one last note I would say on that is that every business that's locating along a retail corridor is necessarily one that is serving the community in some way, shape, or form. So that may not be the case that they're walking in to pick something up, but chances are those are local jobs. Chances are those are businesses that when those workers go out to lunch, they're eating in local places, they're getting coffee from a local place, and this is all part of the neighborhood economy. So we actually don't view it as, we don't think that having a requirement to be retail is necessary, in part because of all those other things, and also because of all the other businesses that locate along a commercial corridor today that do not require retail, and there's a whole lot of them. So we don't think that placing these new businesses at a different standard makes sense based on what's already allowed.
Do you want me to ask my last question?
Yeah, just, go ahead.
Sorry. It's a long weekend of stuff. Okay, I do want to say that if there was a retail front, they too would eat in the neighborhood too. So, okay, so the last thing is topic 5, which I represent. CB1, so that's the hub. It's going to allow commercial use on the ground floor. Well, it's going to expand the use of commercial use on ground floor, second floor, and above. And I think you have a slide in this slideshow that talks about how high some of this commercial usage is going to be in the mixed buildings. And I've heard you say how, our housing issue and our economic issues are all interconnected. But obviously, we're only voting on the economic opportunity right now. But if we allow more commercial usage in a residential building, that's going to be less residential units, which I'm assuming you're going to solve in part 3, not you, but the DCP. But I don't know. One of our concerns is that the hub, for example, has lots of public transportation, lots of trains, so therefore people like me live there because it is easily accessible. So if you diminish residential units in that area, then there's going to just be less people who can live in that area.
Right. I understand where your logic is coming from. It does suggest that what you're saying is that just because a space can be commercial means that it must be commercial. And so that's not what we're doing here. We're saying, and in fact, in the hub is a great example, you can already have commercial through the entire building. But what you don't see as commercial through the entire building, a lot of that space might be empty or just is able to be converted to residential use. So what Proposal 5 is all about is saying the zoning mandates today you have to have commercial and then you have to have residential above, that there's an order to these. And what the zoning is saying is that that order, in some circumstances, doesn't make sense and in fact may be a barrier to housing production. So for example, let's say there's an office building, and I'm going to be making this up because I don't actually know, but let's say there's an office building with 2 elevator banks. And one elevator bank goes to floors 3 to 10, and one goes from 11 to 20. What the zoning today would say is you have to empty out all 17 floors in order to even convert one of those floors to residential. What this proposal would allow is for you to take one full elevator bank, make sure that so long as you're meeting the other stipulations we have in the zoning, you can convert half of that building while keeping the other half as offices. And this is the kind of flexibility that we know, along with changes that you mentioned are coming in the housing opportunity text, that can help enable more partial office to residential conversion. So we don't see these two as in conflict. In fact, we see the proposals we're making here and the proposals that are coming in housing opportunity as being very complementary to that sort of building out adaptation that we need.
Thank you so much. We will move on with questions. I just want to remind folks that OPA 1 Community Board has voted and submitted their recommendation on this text amendment, just as a reminder. Angel, I believe you had
Yes.
a question.
I'm Angel Caballero. I'm
Hello.
Chair of Community Board 5. Good morning, everyone. Enable micro, in number 14, the enable micro distribution, what will the impact permit overnight and trucking parking permits be?
Okay. So in fact, overnight parking or overnight drop-off is one of the things that we think could help be enabled by this process. So speaking with DOT, they have a number of programs now to try and encourage off-hours deliveries. And they do this for retail stores, particularly in places like Midtown where there's a lot of congestion during the daylight hours. But what zoning still doesn't allow them to do is to have a truck delivery in the overnight, leave that product in a building, and in the morning have someone pick up that product and deliver it to people's homes or businesses. So what this proposal does, what this allowing a new kind of business type does, is allow for that off-hours delivery in more places because you can store that product overnight, whereas today's zoning does not allow that.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Community Board 7, we had some questions about.
Oh, hold on.
Oh, thank you. Community Board 7, we had some questions about number 9, the nightlife. Will it be only in a commercial district, and will any soundproofing be required if there are apartments above?
Thank you. On the first part of your question, yes. This is for businesses that are allowed in commercial districts. So this is your, just to get very technical for a second, currently there are 5 separate ways in our zoning to define a bar or restaurant. One of them is just a bar or restaurant. It's allowed anywhere. It's allowed to have incidental music. So it's allowed to have, say, a jazz trio or someone just, even a DJ playing in the background. But the moment you start having people coming to that bar or restaurant for a purpose, for live entertainment, say that's music or something else, then you go into another part of the zoning. And currently the zoning says as long as you're under 200 people, you can have live music. And that's allowed anywhere, in any commercial overlay, in any commercial district. So that's essentially what we're proposing, is that if you can have live music today, you can have people dancing to that live music tomorrow, but keeping in place that 200-person cap, which is, in looking at venues across the city, is roughly the size of a standard storefront, give or take. On the second part of your question, around sound mitigation. So when these businesses are on the ground floor, the zoning itself does not mandate additional sound mitigation, but it does say that if you're locating above the ground floor, you have to provide that sort of sound mitigation, because this would be a business that's locating in a new place that isn't allowed today. Now, the Office of Nightlife, we've worked really hard on this proposal with, and something they've said, and through a program that they have called Mend NYC, is it's a mediation program. So if a business, if a bar or restaurant is having complaints and they're not being resolved through 311 or another part of the system, this mediation brings together an individual who's making those complaints with the business, and in many instances, or at least in more than one instance that I'm aware of, has led to the business installing soundproofing in people's homes, installing soundproofing in the business to mitigate what's happening at the ground floor space. So this is something that, admittedly, the zoning, it's sort of outside of the zoning, but it is something that we look to as a creative solution that the city has had for when there's an existing business that's leading to concerns in the community.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Before we move on to the vote, I just want to recognize that we've been joined by chairs from Community Board 9 and Community Board 11. Welcome. And also representatives from Councilmember Oswald Felice's office and Councilmember Rafael Salamanca. Thank you for joining us. Seeing that there are no further questions or comments on this text amendment, I would like to, oh, yes.
How you doing? Just a 2-part question. So with this being an 18-part proposal, how much of this the current zoning is currently negatively affecting the Bronx specifically, and has there been any positive impact projections with the pending zoning? And I'll get to my second part.
Yeah. It's hard to give you an actual number behind that, but I'll just sort of describe the situation. And we know of this in kind of two circumstances. A lot of what happens is today, the zoning, if you have the money, you can figure out what to do. You can hire an expensive land use attorney, you can hire an architect, you can navigate these rules, these processes. It takes a while, but you can do it. If you don't have the means, or if you're just starting out and you don't want to read 4,000 pages of law, oftentimes it just is unclear on what you can do. And I use that example of a cell phone repair shop intentionally because you can look through the entire book and not see the word cell phone repair mentioned. And so you might think to yourself, oh, that's a retail store, but you're doing repair. And the zoning today says if you're in a C1 district, you can't do most forms of repair, but in a C2 district, you can. So let's say you sign a lease not knowing the difference between a C1 and a C2 district, you sign up for a C1. 6 months might go by, no problem. 3 years might go by, no problem. And then someday someone walks into the storefront, recognizes you're doing repair work, and you get a fine. You didn't know you were doing the wrong thing. And we see that kind of scenario play out a lot. And that's the status quo, and that's how it affects people. And so a lot of what we're trying to do in these proposals is just simply say, make the zoning much more clear on what you can do in your space and where you can locate. I'm not going to say that we're going to solve everything. It's still a big, long document. But we want to do everything we can, particularly for the city's small entrepreneurs, for people who are just starting out, to reflect how the economy has evolved and to make sure that as we go into the future, that it continues to allow people to do the work. So one last thing I'll add in some numbers. They're in my head because they're citywide. I can get you the Bronx ones. 17,000 vacant storefronts across the city. And we have tens of millions of square feet of empty office space. Now, there are a lot of reasons why that's the case. There's a lot of reasons why we have storefront vacancy, but one of them is the zoning, because it makes it harder to know where you can go, and because there are all of these arbitrary limits. You can do cell phone sales in a C1 district. You can't do cell phone repair in a C1 district. Why? So we want to alleviate these kinds of barriers and make it clear where you can go.
And my last question is, has there been any aftercare components that's going along with this introduction of new zoning, like how we're going to support and roll out the equitable solution for small businesses with the new zoning so that they can take advantage of it, and also getting the word out and doing the knowledge so that people know what's coming? I know I live in the corridor, the Jerome Avenue rezoning, where we're still actively reminding business like, hey, you gotta, get it moving soon, and this is how you do it. So yeah.
Yeah, you're describing a lot of the work that we are wanting to do. And I was just on a call with the Small Business Services office on Friday about exactly this, where now that the zoning is much more clear what you can do, how do we make sure that people know about it? How do we provide the kinds of resources, whether they're online or in person, flyers, all kinds of different ways to let folks know about the opportunity that's coming? A lot of the work in developing these proposals came with organizations whose day-to-day jobs are helping small business navigate regulations. So these are business improvement districts, chambers of commerce, industrial service providers, folks whose job is business services. But there's much more that we can do. The only sort of technical caveat I'll go is that these are a process. So we don't want to be going out there and saying these proposals will exactly help you by doing X, Y, and Z, when X, Y, and Z may change between now and when the city council makes some considerations and changes to them. So it's kind of chicken and egg how to begin the implementation, but it's something that at least I am personally thinking about a lot more as we go through the process. So this is my pitch for anyone. Community board members are an important part of this process. You all have been a part of the giving us recommendations on things we need to change, things you like, things you don't like. If and when this is adopted, you all have many small businesses in your neighborhoods as well. So you can be helpful as a conduit for information with us, making sure that if there are questions that someone has, that we can give them answers. So there's a lot more we can do here, and much more that we want to do here.
We'll hold you to that.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Because I think to your point, in the Bronx, we're seeing a lot of outdated zoning areas around Mont Haven, around Hunts Point, and I think our small businesses are typically the ones to hear about it last. So we want to make sure that we're in the know and that we're doing our part collectively. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you.
CB2? Yes. How are you? Good morning.
I would like to say yes to submit recommendations by our city.
You are beating me to it. You're ahead of my agenda. But before I take your motion, any further questions or comments? All right, so hearing none, can I get a motion to adopt this text amendment? Yes. CB2? Can I get a second motion? Second. All right, so I'll start with roll call. Community Board 1.
We are yes with modifications. Am I supposed to say all of them out loud?
No, I believe you submitted. Yep, thank you so much. I have a yes from CB2. Community Board 3?
Yes.
Community Board 4?
Before I start, I want to thank the Department of City Planning and Paul Phillips' office for making themselves available to us for our 3 meetings, and particularly, and also at the end, of our final vote, and also to BronxNet for giving us their presentations for us to review it, which helped out a lot. In that saying that, Community Board 4 voted in the affirmative on all 18 proposals, with 3 with conditions.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Community Board 5?
Yes.
Thank you. Community Board 6?
Yes, with recommendations.
Community Board 7.
Yes, with the conditions, second.
Thank you. Community Board 8.
No, with recommendations.
Community Board 9.
Will remain abstain because the full board did not review this process. So I personally would say yes, but I was told by majority of them to review this.
Abstain, yes. Well, carry that vote in your community board when city planning goes over. Community Board 10.
No.
Community Board 11.
No.
Community Board 12.
So this was difficult because it was a 60 days, it was during the holidays, so it was hard to review all of the materials. There were parts of it that we did like, but we voted no with recommendations. Language was vague, with more time, maybe it would have been different, but we voted no. We did submit our recommendations. Thank you so much, you were super helpful as well.
Thank you. Moving on to City Council representatives. District 8, Councilmember Diana Ayala. District 11, Councilmember Eric Dinowitz.
At this time, Councilmember Dinowitz would like to abstain.
District 12, Councilmember Kevin Riley.
Councilmember Riley will be abstaining.
District 13, Councilmember, there's no representatives here.
She's here.
Oh, sorry. Wait, Christy Momorado?
The councilmember will be voting with community boards and will be a no.
District 14, Councilmember Pierina Sanchez.
Councilmember Sanchez will be abstaining.
District 15, Councilmember Oswald Feliz.
Councilmember Feliz abstains.
District 16, Councilmember Althea Stevens.
Councilmember Stevens will be abstaining.
District 17, Councilmember Rafael Salamanca.
Councilmember Salamanca abstains.
District 18, Councilmember Amanda Farias.
Councilmember Farias votes yes.
Given the votes. Oh, and on behalf of the borough president, she votes yes with recommendations.
So we have 9 yeses
9 yea, 5 noes,
and 8 abstentions.
and 8 abstentions. It does not pass on the borough board. Thank you so much, city planning, and thank you to everyone that was an advocate of this.
Don't leave, you got a second one.
Yes.
Just have to report to my board. 9 yeses, 5 noes, and 8 abstentions. Thank you.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much once again, city planning. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Matt, for your presentation and for always being available to every single one of us for questions and comments. Moving on to agenda item number 2. Are we ready? Wonderful. All right, so moving on to agenda item number 2, we will have a presentation from the Independent Budget Office, who is here to present and review a presentation titled Budget 101, providing us with an overview of the New York City budgeting process. Please welcome Malik, Press Secretary, and Lisa Neary, First Deputy Director, and Logan Clark, Assistant Director of Budget Review. Thank you for being here with us this morning.
Thank you for having us today. So my name is Malik Alshamri. I am the New York City Independent Budget Office's Press Secretary. I'm going to talk a little bit of Lisa's going to give an overview of what IBO is, and then Logan's going to be giving us the budget presentation. IBO, for the past year or so, has been kind of going through this leadership transition, and one of the things that came out of the transition was this desire to broaden our outreach to communities all across New York City. And, we're here today to talk about the budget, but really we kind of want to jumpstart a conversation, an ongoing conversation with all community boards in the city, in the borough, to figure out how can we as an agency help you guys through the budget process. What are some of the things that would be important for you to know about that you or your communities don't know about? And really, we just kind of want to be a partner with a lot of the communities in the Bronx and then throughout New York City. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Lisa, IBO's First Deputy Director.
Thank Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for having us today. As Malik said, we are going through a transition in leadership at the IBO, and I just thought I'd say a few words about how and why IBO was created to begin with, in case some of you don't know that history. So, and also just to sort of help with context and situate us and help you understand how we might be helpful. So back in 1989, way back in 1989, the US Supreme Court handed down a decision that found that the structure of New York City's government at that time was unconstitutional. Most of the legislative functions of city government were then housed with the Board of Estimate, which was made up of borough presidents, and but disproportionately represented the people of the city of New York. So in conjunction with the Charter Revision Commission that was created to respond and deal with the US Supreme Court decision, the commission recognized, the Charter Commission at the time recognized that the mayor's office was going to end up with a lot of authority, especially over things like budget and land use. And they debated at length about whether to create some sort of mechanism for other elected officials other than the mayor, to have input and sort of oversight over the city's budget. So they created the Independent Budget Office. They modeled it after the Congressional Budget Office. We were designed to provide a counterweight to the mayor's office management and budget. We have broad access to information from all city agencies, and we have a guaranteed budget so that mayors who don't like us, and there have been a few, can't just take our funding away and get rid of us. So we are here for elected officials in the city council, borough presidents, and we're here for members of the public. You can ask us any question you have about the city's budget, and as you all know, it is rather large. I think at this point it might be the 5th largest government budget in the country, ahead of all states except California, New York, and maybe Texas. Anyway, so that's sort of the history of who IBO, how we came into being, and yeah, and so every year we do some mandated reports on the city's budget, and Logan is here to talk to you through some budget basics, some information about this year's budget, and just sort of the budget process in general.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yep.
Good morning, folks. My name is Logan Clark. I am the Assistant Director of Budget Review at IBO. That's a pretty broad-sounding title, and it is kind of a broad title. Our portfolio deals with all of the centralized costs, so that's citywide staffing, fringe costs, benefits, and that's all really, really dry stuff. But in a prior life, I used to work on parks budget, the sanitation budget, resiliency, as well as fleet, a whole lot of other things. So if you've got questions about, just about any part of the city budget, we can either answer them today, or we will at least know who to talk to. So if you do have anything, we don't get to it today, you can always email us, as Lisa said. We're here for you guys. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. And so we're going to talk about what the budget is, the process, what the sort of yearly cycle looks like, and where the dollars in the current budget are going to and where they're coming from. So budgets are a public document that forecasts the amount of money that a government will receive and spend in a period of time. Normally that's 1 year. There are some states that do a biannual budget every 2 years, but the city of New York has a 1-year fiscal year, and we update that financial plan 4 times a year. And budgets convey city policy decisions and reflect the priorities of both the mayor and the council. budgets are very much a statement of values. You know, where we spend our dollars is where we actually have our priorities. And so this is a really sort of important statement. It's not just a framework for how we're actually going to spend our money. It's very much a public relations document as well. You know, it's very important to for certain city council members to get things in. Same thing with the mayor. And so that's really sort of this political aspect of the budget that comes through. And budgets are a blueprint for the way that the government will spend money. So that's your expenditures, how much the city will receive, and where they will receive those dollars from. That's the revenue side. And then how those will be balanced. And so after the fiscal crisis of the 1970s, New York City is required by state law to have a balanced budget every year. And so that means that our revenues must equal our expenditures. And so that creates some interesting dynamics. Mostly, you know, what do we do with surplus? Technically, you're not allowed to have surplus on the books. And so there are different ways that we get around that, mostly by, you know, prepaying expenditures for next year. But we also have a rainy day fund now, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's just go ahead and talk about the yearly cycle. So the city fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. And so if you see a lot of budget analysts out and about having a wonderful time on the 30th, it's because the year came to a close, and that's our fiscal new year. The adopted budget is due before June 30th, and so City Council needs to vote to adopt it. This, in my memory, has not ever been stretched. Even in 2020, really contentious year for the budget. It was during the George Floyd protests. They voted on it at sometime like at 11:58 on the 30th, so that's not generally a timeline that shifts at any point in time. And so after that, there are current year budget modifications that occur in generally November, January, and April. The current administration is much more punctual with their budget updates than the de Blasio administration was. The de Blasio administration sort of notably often asked for extensions on getting these things done, but the current administration is generally sticking to charter-mandated deadlines. So. And where we are right now, I'm not actually sure how the pointer works. Let's see. Oh, there we go. We are right here right now, which is in the preliminary budget cycle. The mayor just released this, what was it, last week on the 16th, along with the state budget, which came out on the same day. It was a very exciting day for a bunch of very nerdy people. But let's just sort of go through how this the year progresses. And so we start out with the adopted budget in June. This finalizes the fiscal year for the previous fiscal year and also adds council initiatives. So you'll often see council members requesting, requests for like council initiatives, nonprofits. This is where their discretionary ads are used, and that's the time that they're added to the budget. The first quarter plan, or the November plan, is a progress report on the current fiscal year. And so back in October of last year, the mayor said, hey everyone, we are in rough fiscal shape. There's a lot of headwinds going on. We're going to need to cut things within the current year. And that was at that point in time, if you recall, he issued what was called a PEG letter, which is a communication to the agencies that's saying, hey, we're doing a hiring freeze. We need you to cut your budget. We need to come up with X amount of revenues or reductions in expenditures. And so typically the November plan isn't as spicy as it was this past year, but this year the sort of general fiscal landscape required it. The preliminary budget is the first year the first plan that the next year is brought into balance. And so we just talked about having a balanced budget. You don't need to budget a balanced budget for all years within your fiscal plan. So next year, you're allowed to have deficits in your first year in the November plan, but you have to bring the next year into balance at the preliminary plan. And so that's why there was a lot of pressure on that PEG letter. It wasn't just about the current year things, it was about what we were spending next year as well. And so at that point in time, we had a stated out year one that would be, next year, budget deficit of $7 billion. At least that's what the mayor said. We were pretty convinced that it was not near that. It was much smaller in our report. I think it was about $2 billion, yeah. And so we weren't as convinced that there was such a huge budget gap based upon where expenditures had been historically, where revenues had been historically. But the mayor, just last week, basically brought that down to zero, which, he said that he needed $7 billion. We weren't that pessimistic. But it is now in balance, and it will be in balance all the way through next year. So the executive budget, which will be coming out likely in April, probably April 26th, if I can remember my charter dates. That is there so that the city has an opportunity to update its budget after the state budget is released. And so the state budget has a very large impact on the city's budget. There is currently about $20 billion reflected within the current year that we are getting from the state. And so it's really a big mover and shaker of our budget. And so if we don't have an opportunity to update that after the state releases its budget, we're really going to be out of whack with reality for quite some time. And so the April budget is really important. It's a good time to be looking for state ads. So, for all of you who are really concerned about education, I know I am. Education's massively funded by state dollars. And so you want to keep an eye on the April budget. And then right after that, you get back into June. And so they're starting the cycle all over again, figuring out how to finish out the first year and what the next year is going to look like. IBO releases reports on the November plan, the preliminary budget, and the executive budget. So we don't do anything for the adopted plan. At that point in time, we figure you all would rather just enjoy your summer. But that's the way that the charter was written. So let's take a quick look at the primary budget actors and other participants. So we have, in terms of primary actors, we have the mayoralty, and with that, the Office of Management and Budget. If you hear people throw OMB around like it's a four-letter word, they're the arm of the executive that is responsible with administering the budget and implementing its policies. So they're not always the most popular person in the room. There are a lot of really great people there that are doing really difficult work in terms of the budget side. So, but they draft and propose financial plans to the city council, and then they also manage the city budget and oversee agency activities. So that includes staffing plans, the hiring freeze is implemented by them. If you want to shift money around from, I've got, surplus in my staffing budget, but I need more contractual expenditures. They're the folks that implement that type of change. They also take new needs requests from agencies. So, Parks comes through and they say, I need a new park. I need all this new money above and beyond what we already have. They're the folks that do the review of that. Everybody else too, not just Parks. And City Council negotiates with the mayor and then approves the budget before June 30th. They also hold public hearings to scrutinize and understand the financial plans. And so this is a lot of where City Council's power lies, is the ability to hold the mayor accountable to their budget and act as an equal partner in terms of those negotiations. City Council is always holding hearings on a whole variety of issues. But after the plans, each committee gets a real good crack at their part of the budget. So that's something to be on the lookout for. The schedules are on City Council's website. And so if you want to spend truly, I don't know how many of you are city government nerds, but they're often very riveting. So I like watching them, but my wife does not. So. Other participants include the comptroller, who audits actual spending and compiles the annual comprehensive financial report. That's a document that gets released in about September or October of every year, and that is the official closed out document of finances for the city for the prior year. And so if you ever want to look at what happened, the budget is basically like, we think that's going to happen. The annual comprehensive financial report, that's what happened. Again, very dry document, but if you need help navigating it, please come to us. We spend hours reading these. And so if you do need to find something, we're a really good resource to help you answer those questions. So, the borough presidents are responsible for allocating discretionary funding within their respective boroughs. This includes both expense and capital dollars. So you'll hear certain requests get called 211s or the 249 process. That's for local capital projects here in your borough. And so if you want to talk about upgrading a community center or getting something done at a park, please talk to your borough president. They're really great at this. Also talk to your city council members because they've got other ads as well. The community boards can also conduct public hearings and compile feedback on the budget. There's the community needs process or district needs process that happens every year. And those are comments that are compiled by your teams and then sent to OMB for their review to consider for budgetary needs. The Financial Control Board reviews and provides oversight with respect to the financial management of New York City. This is really I hesitate to call it a relic or a vestigial aspect of the financial crisis of the 1970s, but they were there to basically make sure that we were sticking to our new charter, our new mandates, that we had a balanced budget. They technically have an ability to take over the city if things really go off the rails. But when we say really go off the rails, it's got to go deeply, deeply bad. It's not likely to happen anytime soon. There are some people that are like, it would be great if the FCB took over again. And it's like, what would need to happen to get us there is not going to be good. So, and then finally, IBO, us. So we independently analyze the budget and policy decisions of New York City. We also provide budget hearing or budget presentations like this. Sort of think of us as like a librarian that knows everything about the library, provided that the library is the budget. We're really good on providing economic indicators for folks, school performance indicators. If you've got a policy idea and you're just like, what's going on with this particular sphere? We've got a very good team of researchers, not because I'm one of them, but like, they're awesome folks there. Our economists have been like nailing their jobs reports to within like 200 jobs in a city of 8.5 million people. So not to pat ourselves on the back or toot our own horn, but they're really good. So let's just do quick budget vocabulary really quickly. We're not going to quiz anybody, but if you do have questions about it, you can always come back to us. This is just more to help you sort of understand where things may lie within the budget and help you sort of shape your own questions. And so units of appropriation are the broadest budget level below an agency, and they typically represent how an agency is subdivided. Generally, this is either a borough or department. So, for sanitation, they've got the Bureau of Recycling and Sustainability, and they handle all of the outreach regarding sustainability issues, the recycling program. Or here within Department of Education, you've got the early childhood programs. So that typically is how larger agencies are split up. Smaller agencies tend to only have two, and that's generally just one for staffing and then one for things that aren't staffing. So there's a little bit less budgetary transparency there. We've got a really great explainer on units of appropriation that came out over the summertime, and so we'll throw the link up there or distribute it to you folks if you want some more information about it. But the important thing here is that you're not allowed to move funds between units of appropriation greater than 5%. So this is when City Council votes on a budget, They vote on the units of appropriation in those levels. And so it's basically having the city council sign off on what they think the broad policies should be. An agency can move funds within a unit of appropriation, but they're not allowed to move them. There's restrictions between moving between them. The next is a budget code. It's the next level below a unit of appropriation. It could be for a specific program or a bucket of central costs. It may also be something where individual agencies say, oh, I've got this program, but I've got it in 5 boroughs. That's 5 different budget codes. Other agencies may say, hey, I've got one program across 5 different boroughs, and it's all in one code. It really varies from agency to agency. That's why knowing your unit of appropriation is a little bit more helpful and is something that you'll be able to compare a little bit more across agencies. And if you need help finding something within the budget, you can come to us for budget codes because it just is an alphanumeric 4-digit code, and it'll drive you mad trying to find it. So. An object code is a subset of a budget code, and it's a further classification. The reason why it's really helpful is it allows us to compare directly between agencies. And so it'll be things like, this is the full-time staffing cost for this program. And it's like, okay, well, I can compare that to the full-time staffing costs in that program in that agency. This is really helpful for things like overtime, contractual spending. And so it's definitely something that we look at a lot as analysts because it allows us that cross-agency and across time we can see the growth in various things. So really helpful. But yeah, we've got those sort of examples here. You know, we've got the budget code for Head Start and then an object code for supplies and materials, which is really broad, but you know, a lot of budget categories are. Quickly, we're just going to talk about, we briefly discussed it earlier, but what a PEG is. This is terminology here that gets used in New York a lot. It is the program to eliminate the gap. And so a lot of folks will just be like, these are budget cuts. They are not necessarily budget cuts. They may include budget cuts, but it might also be things like increased revenues from some sort of policy change. You know, you might be expanding where you have red light cameras, or you might be able to get a new type of federal program to cover your city expenditures. And so the goal here is to balance the budget, matching revenues and expenditures. Other things that it may include personnel vacancies, and they don't necessarily have the hiring freeze itself isn't a PEG, but it would result in, you know, if you're budgeted for 10 people, but you only have 8 people all year, you're saving on 2 salaries annually, right? And so, you know, that's a really small example, but you talk about a city budget that has 300,000 full-time positions. We're never at full staff. We've got about 280, give or take, active full-time folks right now. So, you know, that's nearly 20,000 salaries that we're not paying. So, you know, we've got that room built into the budget that we can take down. And so, you know, same sort of thing, recognizing areas of lower than expected spending that might include on debt service because we are getting better interest rates. It might be because we don't have staff to spend on those contracts. So, you know, when we talk about things not being service cuts, it's a bit of a blurry line to get into just on the individual numbers, and it's really better to look at that on a program-by-program basis. And so, and then I think we had talked about most of the other parts. The pause, delay, or elimination of programs, they tend not to eliminate programs as much, but most administrations are really fond of delaying programs. No one likes to say, oh yeah, we're not doing this anymore. But they do really like to say, we're doing that next year. So that is something that we just sort of need to keep an eye on. Oh, and we also have a really great PEG report on the November plan. We'll also be putting out something based on the January plan as we get through that. But it's a really good assessment of what happened during the November plan. So, And then really quickly, we'll just talk about avenues for budget input. We had talked about council hearings before, so anyone can go ahead and give testimony at those. Council is really a big fan of getting folks in, so please be an active and engaged member of your community. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but your council representatives also want to just hear from you outside of testimony. You can also talk to the public advocate. The public advocate doesn't have direct budget power, but the public advocate has, the bully pulpit. They can bring attention to things. And also, incidentally, they become the mayor if sometimes it's a strange place to be. And then by mid-February, the community boards will be sending their feedback. That's the district needs assessment. And then on early March, the borough presidents will be sending their proposals to reallocate money for their boroughs. And then let's jump into what's in this budget, the fiscal year 2024 budget. So revenues, where's the money coming from? The largest, by far and away, revenue source that New York City has is the property tax. It's $32 billion, and so this is here in millions. So that's both between residential, commercial, mixed use, all types of property tax. Other taxes make up the other portion. The next largest tax is personal income tax, and that's about $17 billion. There's some tax audit revenue in there that's mostly on audits of income taxes. Miscellaneous revenues are items like tickets, fines, fees, charges for service. If you've got a New York City Parks Recreation Center membership, that's where that goes. Unrestricted governmental or intergovernmental aid is a weird sort of much smaller category. Again, just $17 million there. And then the other sort of larger spot that we want to highlight here is the federal categorical grants and state categorical grants. And so federal and state funds make up a very large part, as you can see, of the city budget. All told, that's another $32 billion, about equal to the property tax. The thing to note here is that we're here in FY24 and that there are large drop-offs, particularly on the federal side. That's really a tapering down of federal stimulus funds. And so federal money, it's expiring by 2026. Right now, we're using most of it in FY24. They may roll some of that to next year if they don't use it all this year. But really, when we talk about the overall budget position of the city, why we're looking at doing these PEG programs, the ending of stimulus funds is really a big thing. It's a huge part of the city budget. And so that's something to just keep an eye on. And then let's go ahead and talk expenditures. Personal services is basically staffing. And then we've got the very imaginative category name of other than personal service. So it's just anything that's not staffing. That's your contracts, your pens, your papers. It's payments for social services and public assistance. And so that's the way that the city is sort of broken up, but it's roughly half and half between city staff and not city staff. And then when we talked about the surplus earlier and having a balanced budget, that's where we're looking at these FY23 budget stabilization and FY24 budget stabilization. The city is not allowed to have surplus, but what we do is we prepay expenses for next year or put them in the rainy day fund. So when we talk about, there's never a surplus, there is, in a way, a surplus. And so this is a number that we care about a lot because it helps bring the next year into balance, and it also keeps the current year in balance. So, over the past several years, we've had somewhere between 5.4, or probably around like 5.1 and about $6.1 billion in that operating surplus that's available for budget stabilization. So, we can go and everyone is like, oh, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Over the past several years, we've had about $6 billion on average, roughly, at the end of each year that we are using to prepay next year's expenses. That's still a good fiscal policy to have. It's good to have that cushion there. You know, we don't want to be running out of dollars, but it doesn't mean that there isn't current year resources that we can reallocate to maintain programs. So it's, again, we're not taking policy positions, but it is a resource. So that's something to just highlight there. And then the city also maintains general reserves. This is, I always call it fiscal ballast. I don't know, I'm searching for a better metaphor here, so if folks come up with one, please let me know. But it's basically just a little bit of cushion built in. You know, it's that just saying, I'm $20 for expenses that I may not anticipate at the end of the month, right? And if you think about the budget as your own personal finances. So, and then let's just go ahead and talk real quick about where things go. Education is roughly $33 billion and growing as part of the budget. The miscellaneous budget is, when we talk about the miscellaneous budget, it sounds really not transparent, but the fact of the matter is that's where all of the city's health insurance benefits are paid out from. All of it's basically, you know, all of our health insurance flows through there. So it's mostly just talking about staffing, but we don't budget for those individually. We don't hold agencies accountable for things that are just city benefits citywide. Social services are next. Pensions, debt, we can go through all of these, but if you've got questions about any of them, please let me know. But the overriding story here is education costs a lot, and you know we're paying a lot for that. And then we can, I'm going to go ahead and leave this slide up. This is something that might actually just be better. If you've got questions about budget releases, please let us know. We're happy to walk you through it. Without actually being able to go into the documents, this is more just sort of a reference slide. So, and I think with that, we are coming to questions. So thank you for your patience and listening to me drone on about numbers all morning. So.
Thank you so much, Logan. I think it's budget season, so
It's budget season.
This presentation couldn't come at a better time, so we thank you for that. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Sam, Councilmember Sanchez's Chief of Staff. One, thank you to IBO. We've worked with you all on a number of things, so always find it super helpful. But one question, maybe a silly one. What is a rainy day fund? Like, I know what it is in theory, but what constitutes it going into that fund versus somewhere else?
Yeah, so we haven't made payments to the rainy day fund over the past, I think, year or so. It was something that was actually just formally legalized in 2020, I believe, if I recall correctly. I need to get back to you on the exact date. But it is actually an off-budget fund that we use, and currently we're allowed to draw down on up to 50% of that at any given point in time. It's currently at about $2 billion, but it's basically a spot where, you know, if we hit a recession, we're allowed to bring down or draw down on those funds. We've got roughly about $8 billion in reserves that are available for the city right now. That's between the Rainy Day Fund, another place called the Retiree Health Benefits Trust, which is like deep in the lore of city budget. But that's another spot where we would be able to draw down on. That's got about $5.3 billion, but it's the way that works is a little bit more complicated. It's basically just saying, oh, we're going to let the trust pay out for our retirees' health costs this year as opposed to us adding more money to it. It's a specialized fund for that. But the Rainy Day Fund is about $2 billion. We had done we did some deposits to that back in the tail end of the de Blasio years, but we haven't used it recently. There's also no real standards about when we can use it. The current administration has made it clear that they only want to use it in case of a recession to make up for lost revenues. The idea here being, we're not going to use the rainy day fund just for our private expenditures or our personal policy preferences. It's mostly like, we're hitting a real downturn here. But we haven't tapped into it yet. So it's kind of an open question. There's been no case law around it or anything like that. So, yeah.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
There's a bullet point about community boards' roles.
Yes.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So community boards are able to submit what are called the district needs assessments. And those are requests that can vary incredibly widely. I used to review them over at OMB. It can be anything from, we need a new community center to, I don't like it when Joni over there uses the barbecue in the park. So some of them are not necessarily budget requests, but they're basically requests from the community boards that go through to OMB to look at whether or not they're currently funded in the budget, whether or not this is something that should be funded within the budget. Most of the time, OMB will kick this over to the agencies, and then the agencies may kick it back to OMB. Or they might kick it back to the community board. It really depends on the agency. Certain agencies have really good borough relations. Parks is always pretty active in their communities since it's something that everyone uses. It's very public facing. Not all agencies are like that. And so there might be something that is within an agency that is just sort of not as public facing, that it might get batted back and forth a couple times. And so it's tough to sort of figure out where these land. There are other times where it's not a clear jurisdiction of who would own that type of request. A classic example is the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. They end up with all sorts of just weird things in their budget that other agencies don't want to do or don't have the power to do. A lot of times that comes through on community board requests. So they can be a little bit murky at times, but it is a sort of involved process. I'm not sure the full extent to which it actually has impact on the budget. I would be hesitant to say that it's something that's super effective, or is like a really, it's not like someone on a community board votes to submit something and then it gets done. It's definitely, what I would say is, I come from political organizing in a previous life. I think it's a really good spot to generate an ask and then start building power around an ask. And so, that's when you talk to your council representatives, you talk to your borough president, say, hey, we've got this community request out there. We haven't been getting any traction, or we need your support on this. And that's something that you can start pushing for. So,
Quick question, can we go to the budget slide?
Sure.
I didn't know when the numbers are in parentheses, I don't know if that's.
Yes.
Sorry.
Absolutely. No, that's totally fine. And this is the other thing. If I ever talk alphabet soup or skip over something, it's just because I'm so far up, Anyway, parentheses are negatives in here. So when we say, less intracity revenue, that's basically just backing out the things that agencies buy from each other. So the aforementioned Department of Citywide Administrative Services, DCAS, they sell paper towels and toilet paper and cleaning supplies and PPE and all sorts of other things to agencies. And so that's basically, we're just backing out the things that other agencies owe DCAS or other agencies that are selling things. OTI, that's where all of the phones and telecom services come through. So things like that.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The federal and state grants, why do you predict such a large drop?
So these are just OMB's numbers. So this is not ours. The part of the reason why there's such a large drop is because of the end of federal stimulus funds from the COVID-19 response. But the other part of this is, and it's a much smaller part, but things like Homeland Security grants, they tend to only budget either a year or two out in advance. So The city may know that it will be getting more money, but it doesn't necessarily know the exact amount. The federal fiscal year is a little bit different from our own, but things like, yeah, exactly. And so it's subject to, you know, federal appropriations processes. You know, Washington is such a functional spot, so, you know, yeah. So we tend not to go too far in advance. These numbers will inevitably creep up, I think.
But why the state also?
The state, so that might be for a couple of reasons. You know, there are certain things that might be one-shots that are coming through. This is from the January plan. And so the state added $750 million in FY24 and $750 million in FY25 for asylum seekers in just that 1 year. The state hasn't added funds in the out years for that. We don't know where that crisis is going to go. So it really depends. It's not like we've got a 30-year agreement with the state of New York to say, oh yeah, you're going to give us $20 billion. It really depends on that state appropriations process and how that goes. So.
For the sake of time, we have time for one more question. Comments? All right, wonderful.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Office of Independent Budget. Again, what a timely presentation. I also want to know, I have a couple of announcements before we wrap up. Just want to let everyone know that the fire safety education workshops on behalf of the Bronx Borough President's Office are still up and running. We held a successful workshop at the Bronx Zoo on Saturday. We had over, 50 participants, including 60, including students and children, and the Bronx Zoo was able to provide them with a free Bronx Zoo ticket and free admission, so that was a success. We are still partnering up with NYCHA tenant associations, community and cultural organizations, and our community board. So if any community board, any elected official representative is interested in partnering up with us, we are hosting these in partnership with the FDNY, and we welcome your partnership. We have upcoming workshops that are open to the public, and Marisol will share the flyers for those upcoming workshops. Additionally, we have a number of cultural celebrations coming up in February. As we all know, Black History Month is in the month of February, and we're scheduled to have our Black History Month celebration on February 7th. Additionally, it is also Dominican Heritage Month for all of those who celebrate. Congratulations, it's a celebration. Our Dominican Heritage Month celebration will be hosted on February 22nd with a Dominican flag raising on the 26th at noon. More information to follow. And on the topic of budget, our next borough board meeting will be hosted on February 26th. If that date changes, we will notify you all. We promise to have a better space by then. And we plan on having a representative from the governor's office to give an overview on the state's budget. And we will also be reviewing the borough president's budget as well. So we hope to see you then. Thank you so much once again for joining us. We have one. Before we wrap up, I believe, Kira, you have an announcement for us? Our Director of Community Boards. Yeah, wherever you want.
Hi everyone, as you know, the community board application is now live. It's electronic again this year in English and Spanish, something that we're very proud of. No other borough does that. Deadline is March 1st. We've sent it out to all members who are up for reappointment and people, interested. So we ask for your partnership and outreach, letting people know that the application is open. And secondly, I've sent out to all the boards, the Civic Engagement Commission is doing a lot of trainings on conflict resolution, housing discrimination, Department of Building, so it's important for you and your board members to make sure you take advantage of those trainings.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and we will follow up with copies of presentations, the flyers that we mentioned today. And once again, thank you all for your attention and vote this morning. Have a blessed week.